Welcome to REST, which stands for Resiliency and Empowerment Seminar today. I am your host, Susan Gans, and I'm the founder of Gans Strategic Solutions, where we work at the intersection of business and human behavior. This show is about having conversations with leaders of small, mid-sized businesses, heads of nonprofits, and other community leaders to shine a light on these leaders' journeys, their organizations, and how they're being resilient in the past and today. I am so delighted and honored to interview Tamara Warren today on our show. Tamara has written over 100 publications, including for the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Fortune, Details, Delta Sky, BBC, Car and Driver, Automobile, Auto Week, Vibe, and the Detroit Free Press. She is the founder of Le Car, a personalized car buying concierge and content platform. She is the former transportation editor and senior transportation reporter at The Verge. She is a juror and former U.S. director of the World Car of the Year and has test driven over 1,200 vehicles. That's amazing. Tamara has appeared as a guest on ABC World News Tonight, CBS, CNBC, the History Channel, 50 Minutes Inside on the TF1 network, Cheddar, and the documentary feature Autonomy. She is a Detroit native that lives in New York. Welcome to our show, Tamara.
Hi, Susan. It's so good to be with you today.
I'm so glad that we're talking, and I can't wait to hear more about your journey. So with that, take us back to the early days of your career, about how you got started in journalism and your particular focus on cars and transportation.
Well, I think my start really goes back to actually childhood. I always dreamed of being a writer and writing for the New York Times when I was a little kid. And, writers make lemonade. And so the lemons that we were handed were, the things that are most interesting to us in our own town. So growing up in the Metro Detroit area and coming of age here, I was drawn to write about our culture and our of our city, which as a young person for me meant music and art and sort of the things that we all do when we're young. And as I explored that through newspaper and media, I became more interested in the industry that shaped all of these cultural pieces of our town. And that's what initially made me curious about reporting on cars. And I received my first car job actually just jumping right into it after being a reporter for several years. I ended up taking an internship at Auto Week magazine, which at the time was owned by Crane Communications. And even in the job interview, I was very transparent and said that I'd never actually read a car magazine. And so, which was, I think, a first for these guys. And to hear that from a young interviewee. But I was very confident that using my reporting skills and just natural curiosity and general lack of ego when it comes to not being the best at something kind of threw me into this strange world. And so I did that for a while, stayed on with that magazine doing various projects and ended up writing for them. And around that time had just a lot of personal life changes and decided to move to New York City, which at the time I didn't appreciate my experiences, but I was lucky enough to have a wonderful mentor / friend who was an accomplished editor. I think she was at Time Inc. during that era. And she pointed out that this knack for writing about cars was more than something I should consider a passing fancy. And so I began to explore automotive journalism in addition to writing about design and arts and culture, but found quickly that once I began to test drive cars and learn performance driving, realizing that I unlocked a world that probably wouldn't have been naturally open to me. And it was really fun. Obviously, I got to travel all over and drive all these cars. But, the same questions that drew me into cars in the first place continued to be in my mind and frame a lot of my coverage. So yeah, that's how it all started in journalism. And I've been asking questions and, ever since then, I guess 17, 18 years ago, since I started car writing.
What a journey. I wanted to ask further about the mentor. Um, so that's one person that influenced. Can you talk more about mentors that you've had throughout your career, as well as sponsors? So those people who are advocating for you when you're not physically in the room.
Yeah, and I think this is so important, this topic of mentorship and just being kind of mid-career now. It's something I try to think about myself and remember and think about who, whether formal mentors or informal mentors, who had the most impact on me. And I think because my career trajectory has been non-traditional, I think that my mentorship has come in often informal ways. And so generally, as a writer, more through the creative community, even as a student, my professors from college continued to stay active in my life well into my 30s, and continued to just support me by, if I needed a letter written or talking about my work, they were willing to do so. And I worked in a writing center in college, and that continued to be a part of my life. And then as I became deeper involved in journalism, it was honestly through writers that I know and respected. This writer in particular I was mentioning, her name is Danielle Smith. She's an incredible journalist who's had a long career, so I suggest reading her work. She's covered such a broad range of topics herself. And then also, how to marry really the discipline of creative writing with thoughtful, insightful, consumer-focused journalism. I've had a lot of guidance there. There's a wonderful automotive reporter who's passed away, but Phil Patton, who was the automotive design writer for the New York Times, who just took a lot of time just sort of giving me confidence and making introductions and making me honestly feel welcome at a table, which wasn't always inclusive. So those are a few of the mentors. And then I continue to have mentors. I'm in a few women's groups that meet more formally, and I think that's part of it. And then I also don't think that mentors always need to be older than you. I think you find mentors throughout your life if you're open and just willing to see people who are giving and generous and that have valuable knowledge to share. So I think that's something important, not always to look at seniority, but also just to look within to be honest with yourself about what you're seeking and what you can provide in reciprocity.
Absolutely. You said so many important points here that I want to dig in further. One of the things that struck me is about how you've kept your connections and relationships up over the years, and that has helped shape your career. So can you talk about that? How do you maintain and first develop and then maintain relationships over time?
Yeah, I think for me, it's always trying to do my best and have honest and have integrity with how I deal with people. As a reporter, you're often put in a position by nature of, responsibility to your audience and to your work to, to be fair and to take yourself out of an issue and look at what the greater good is for that. But in addition to that, I think it's also, following up with people. It's, something I've definitely learned as I get older that I didn't appreciate about myself until now, is to just treat people well and not to approach people based on their position in a certain way because they have something transactional to provide you. And I think that's just basic, like, human behavior. But honestly, I think in corporate culture and in every industry, this is an issue that if you are honestly open to people and don't abuse your power and are supportive, it will come back on you because young people get older and they're more willing to understand who gave them a chance, or if someone called and they weren't on the up and up, if you're willing to take that moment and just be a sounding board, provide advice, feedback, even if it always isn't what they want to hear, I think people remember that. So I think that's a big part of relationships. And then finally, just making good on your word, like turning in your work on time, being a person who's willing always to go above and beyond and just do your best with whatever you have to offer in that situation.
Yes, I think what you're bringing out is to be authentic and to always follow up on what you say you're going to do and bring your best self to the table.
Yeah. And
And that,
to own it,
yes,
mess up, because we're all human and we make mistakes, and that's okay too.
absolutely. And that brings me to a related question, something you said earlier about things that were increasing your confidence. Can you talk about confidence? It's so important in business today.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about confidence is it's not something you necessarily show up with. It's something that you learn over time and you develop, and it wanes and it flows. And we all have days where we feel less confidence or moments. But I think for me, confidence comes down to, kind of getting out of my own head, getting out of my own way. I think what makes me good at what I do is that I'm my harshest critic. And sometimes I can overthink things, which then, of course, tax your confidence. Where this can manifest in a positive way is that you double check your work, you replay things, you're careful and thoughtful. Where the flip side of that is that you can develop blind spots or become paralyzed because
Yes.
the insecurities stop you from taking steps or recognizing your own worth and value and where you could grow. Because I think what I've realized, as someone who has more recently become more interested in applying just general business knowledge to my journalism and to my company that I'm building, is that I know a lot of these things, even if they're not formally presented that way, that I have experience, and I can learn new things at any stage in my life. And I think that once I broke through that barrier and realized that I knew what to do and I didn't always need approval from others to do it, and I could just go after it, that confidence that I probably always had somewhere has become easier to access in my professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of confidence, you've been taking a risk in investing in yourself and launching your own company. So, tell us about that decision and what you're doing now.
Well, one thing about myself is that I've always been a dreamer and not afraid to chase a dream. And part of what a dream means to me is finding something that you're super curious about and delving in. And so I spent, many years developing my ideas and my opinions and my thoughts and my theories. And by making the decision to launch my own company, I get to test those theories. And in this context, what that theory is that to me, the decisions we make and the choices we make in our life are sometimes reflected in our purchases and the things we need to live in our everyday lives. First, shelter. Second in place to shelter, with my child singing in the background, is
It's all good. It's real. It's authentic.
is indeed second in place to the homes we live in is how we move around. And that's a big part of what I've spent my time doing in automotive journalism, is test driving all these cars and making assessments on speed and performance and comfort and safety. But really, the advice that I gave my friends along the way as I was doing this work was something that was incredibly valuable to them. And so I began to ask a series of questions when they needed help buying a car, a very simple process. And I would tell people when they asked me what they should buy that I couldn't tell them without understanding more about what they wanted, which is journalism, right? Asking questions, what do you need? And then making an assessment and a decision based on my own experience and what I thought best suited them. And so that concept became the backbone for LaCar. And LaCar simplifies the car shopping process by matching people to their perfect car, by providing relevant content based on their interests. And the secret sauce of it is that being a woman in a male-dominated industry is that we're also the dominant purchaser of cars. Women buy more cars than men. And so I thought, well, what if I just started with women by applying this to thinking broadly about all the different kinds of women I know in different sectors of my life, and how that would translate to audience. And so we've built an iOS app that matches people to their car. And we've also are preparing to launch a new content site that with content that's shaped around our early findings from our research, from our users, and really tries to get at the core of what people's relationship is to cars. Some of it will be fun and with aspirational people that we look up to telling stories about their cars or their personal mobility, and others will just be simple practical advice about how to buy a car online during a pandemic, things of that nature.
So that brings me to a couple of questions. So here's a fun question, which is, one of the frustrating things I have in driving my car is like where to put my purse. And in one of my cars, there's like a basket, but it's not big enough for the purse. So I don't know if you can influence car makers to think about that, or if there's a car that exists out there around that.
Yeah, well, our broader mission is to change the way that makers build, make, design, think, and talk to women about their personal mobility and their vehicle choices. And so hopefully we will make a dent in that. But I think that speaks to the fact that far too often, even in design studios where some of those decisions are made, or product planning teams, that you may have a couple women, but it's just not equitable diversity often enough. Car makers are very quick to tell us when there are all female teams, but it's just not standard enough. And it's such an obvious problem that you're not the only person to ask that for sure. And oftentimes what I find is a safety mechanism, which is that beeping noise when your seatbelt, if you put a heavy bag in there, you're like, oh, now I can't even reach inside my purse to grab my wallet when I go and go through a toll booth or something of that nature. So yes, it's something that shouldn't exist in 2020, but it does. So we need to do something about that.
And another fun question is, what is your most memorable test drive experience?
Well, that's a really good question, because there's been a few. From a speed perspective, I once told this very dramatic story about driving that I could share with you, about driving, the fastest I've ever driven, which was on a track in an Aston Martin DB9 proving grounds. And I think I went around 200 miles per hour in an oval, and with a driving instructor coaxing me. And talk about confidence. I was like, not at the time, I had a child, like really wanted to survive that moment. So
sure.
Realizing that, logic, if there's a race car driving teacher sitting in the passenger seat, he probably wants to survive this experience. So he's likely not to push me into something that's so high risk that's going to end our lives. So that was my logic. But doing that just felt incredibly empowering. And also realizing that by, taking these risks, that I was actually developing these incredible safety skills to be highly attuned to being a safer driver. So I'm a big advocate for drivers training in general, and think that true safety comes through skill, as it does in so many things in life. And so that was like a really incredible moment. But I've had many. I once survived a blizzard in Iceland where it was unexpected, global warming, right? A blizzard in September, and we landed for 18 hours, and that was incredibly frightening. And we had to be rescued, and Bigfoot trucks, and then a tow hitch broke and snapped back, like shattering the windshield like inches from my face. Like that was really terrifying. But then, I honestly just moments, I think also some of the most incredible moments I've had in cars are when I'm driving with someone and it's an intimate space and we can just have a wonderful conversation, where you get in the car like, I don't feel like driving today. you have such a wonderful time together that by the end of the ride, you're just like alive and you're inspired. So I think those simple moments matter too.
Absolutely. I'm going to pick up on this theme of empowerment. So tell me about how you empower others and how you empower yourself.
Mm. Um, I feel like I never do enough, but when it comes to others, I definitely formally, when I worked as an editor, I always try to find young writers and share some of the things that I've learned from the amazing editors I've had over the years, and what not to do from the not so amazing editors. So formally, that's one simple way. Professionally, and then over the years, I've led creative writing workshops as a volunteer or as a teacher. And so I think really showing people the power of storytelling and how to use pen to paper and a way to do so is important. And then I think just in general just being willing to make sure that we have representation in different fields of our life, not just as women, but always making sure that I'm thinking in my work about audience and questioning myself, so that recognizing when I have power and when I can share it with others, and how I can bring more people into the fold and in my community in whatever way I can. So but I think that there's always more we can do, right? Like the world is incredibly complex, and power is such a big part of it globally. So the more that we can constantly challenge ourselves to think about those, our own roles and what we can do in micro ways is super important.
Absolutely. I think what you're saying is that each of us have the ability within ourselves to empower ourselves as well as others. There's ways simply sharing the gifts that we have with others.
I think so.
Absolutely. So talk to us about resiliency and especially during these times.
hmm Yeah, I have two children, and so especially with my son who is in middle school, we've been having lots of conversations about this. And one way it's come about is a friend of mine, she has daughters his age, and so we have a virtual book club going. And it's wonderful to talk to young people if you can, whether you're a parent or not, because they remind you the simple lessons of resiliency in conversation. And if you can get them to talk about a book, you can see a theme in my conversations always comes back.
Yes.
But I think it applies to other things too. But we're actually, so this week we decided to just go right on the nose, and we're reading Anne Frank. And
Wow.
talk about just maybe developing an appreciation for we could see strands of that, of course, like being the time we're living in, being stuck in a place, but then also obviously an appreciation for all of the wonderful things we do have access to. We can be speaking like this, and the empathy of reading a young girl's diary who had no one, who was in such horrific moments, and realizing that wasn't that long ago. So I think that for how I personally find resiliency is through those kind of just thinking about other people's positions in life, and really just savoring the wonderful parts of my own life that I've been so lucky to have. And that's where I dig deep. And then another way is, about 20 years ago I started taking dance classes as an adult, and dancing and just being like connected to my body is such a wonderful way to find your resiliency when your mind just isn't there. Just go in your body. And I think that you make better business decisions when you breathe and move and get yourself unstuck. So that I've been taking a lot of dance classes online during this time period, for sure.
So that's something else that we have in common is that I'm a long time dancer and I
Oh,
did do adult dancing.
I love.
in New York City,
Mhm.
and adult recitals, and there's so much fun. Even in
Mhm.
fact, the night before I gave birth to my younger daughter, I was dancing.
Well, that's like the best way to for to go into labor for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a playfulness to dance too that's wonderful, and it's musical and
Yes,
those things. So that's 100%.
absolutely.
What kind of dance do you do? What technique?
So it was jazz hip hop. What is
Oh,
my
cool.
thing? Yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. High energy for sure.
I love that.
Another thing that you brought out was really being in gratitude. So just being thankful for a lot of things that sometimes I think we just overlook. So I love that perspective. What would you like our audience to remember from today's conversation?
I think it's important, as people who are interested in business also remember how important it is to have representation from people that come from the arts. And I think that I'm a good example of that as somebody who's got a creative writing degree, that I don't see that as like a separate part of my life. And I think that um, in order to find the solutions of the future, we need really creative thinkers. And so while I've worked in tech and automotive, really what's been the common theme in my life is coming back to problem solving using creative solutions. And even if we're not the creative thinkers in the bunch, that if we can access those people, they probably can unlock some of that for us. And there's a reciprocity in building relationships with those who share different skill sets than you. So I think that that's something that I would say. And also, taking something so mechanical and scientific as a car is just a metaphor for that journey that I'm on, which is to bring people together in more inclusive ways.
I love that perspective, and it is so important to be inclusive of various perspectives. I agree with you. I think the companies that are going to be successful and stand out in the future are the ones that are going to be inclusive of different backgrounds of all types, and certainly room for the creative. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tamara, we want people to find you. So, how can they find you?
Well, I'm very findable. I'm so yes. My company is called Lacar. Our new site that is launching will be lacar.co. So we're very excited about that. So follow along with that with news to be announced there. We're on Instagram at Find Lacar Co. My Instagram is Tamara Warren, TamaraWarren. On Twitter, I'm Tamara Tam. And yes, and you can find the Lacar iOS app in Apple Store. So yeah, and I love to have conversation and ideas always thrown at me. So feel free to reach out anytime.
That's fantastic. So, I'm going to repeat that. So, it's Lacar is the app and soon to be launched website, lacar.co. You
Mhm.
can find Tamara on Instagram, Tamara Warren or Tamara Warren, and Twitter, Tamara Tan.
Yes.
And with that, I thank you so much for taking the time today to share your journey and your insights. And I so love the creative perspective and its impact on problem solving. And to our audience, I appreciate you joining us today to hear this very important conversation. Until the next time.